Hi everybody. In this lecture, we'll be talking about interesting framing of the subjects in your photographs and a couple other important compositional elements. We're going to talk about lines, leading lines. Roads are an easy place to start with that. We're also going to talk about layering, one of my favorite things actually. Layering. The best photographs are really layered very, very well. Photographs are two-dimensional, of course. The depth you create by layering images is necessary in a way to move them towards being more real, more three-dimensional, just like the world we live in. Let's start with framing then. I always look for natural framing devices like doorways and windows and fences and things like that. These can be a gimmick, but they can also be lovely and surprising, and they can add layers and depth. I use natural framing devices all the time on assignment. Let's look at a few examples. This is out at the National Elk Reserve in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. This grid pattern, the fencing, keeps the elk off the highway, of course, but it can also be a nice framing device. Right there. Let's put an elk in there. It would have been better if I'd had 10 elk, one in each square, but I only had one elk, and that's good enough, though. This will work. Now, what about this? Delicate Arch in Arches National Park in Utah. People go there all the time, and they frame up their family in that arch. It's a very obvious choice. You know, though, car windshields. I love car windshields. They're great framing devices. I love doing that. I do it all the time because I see the world through a car windshield. Since I drive so many places, I spend so much time on the road. That's actually not a happy sight when you're being pulled over by the Chilean police for speeding in the Atacama Desert. We didn't know what was going to happen. I just know that I had to swallow hard, hold my breath, take this one little picture because I was afraid we were going to get in serious, serious trouble and get arrested, but it worked out okay. Everybody loves the camera, it turns out. In this case, the windshield worked as a great framing device. It would have been better to see the driver's eye in the rearview mirror a little bit, but I didn't really have the time to work and craft the situation, as you can imagine. Just a quick frame and hope I don't get arrested. Now, here's one in which I did have a chance to work the situation. We're in an open Land Rover where the windshield literally folds up and out of the way. This is in the Pantanal of Brazil. That's my driver, who, believe it or not, was named Popsicle. I'm not kidding. So Popsicle is driving along. We're looking for giant anteaters at sunrise or whatever other wildlife we can find. And we see him framed in that rearview mirror, and it's nice. And he's lit, and the landscape's lit the same way. Everything's evenly lit. That's great. These kind of things work out fine. The next element I wanted to talk about is leading lines. These are naturally occurring lines in a photo, and a classic example of that is roads. You visually want to go down that road. You're not really looking off to the side, you're looking straight down a road. Roads lead you into compositions. They lead you into the frame, and it continues on. Leading lines are a very basic compositional tool. They've been used since the Middle Ages in paintings. They're very handy though. They'll help you focus on what's important by really leading your eye through the photograph. Very easy. You know, train tracks work the same way. Leading lines in train tracks. This is in a small town in northwest Texas where my grandmother grew up. And these tracks are kind of a critical compositional element here, aren't they? Besides the lovely fall colors, it's just perfect to get you in. It's an old-fashioned photography trick on a very old town, Derazette, Texas. Painters use this trick all the time, all the time. Now look at the lines in this picture. Wow, lots of lines. It doesn't have to be a train or a road. It could simply be an arena's edge and the cattle inside. Anything that simply leads your eye into the frame and involves you into the composition, right? So there are all sorts of different types of leading lines. Or like this, El Dragón, the giant dragon-shaped sand dune in Chile. It's absolutely huge. You've got a line going right in, takes you right into that paraglider. You could have a leading line, for example, that's super wide, or it could be really narrow, simple. It could just be a crack in the pavement if you're close up on it. It could be a chalk line on a sidewalk leading to a kid. It could be anything. Leading lines really are just a way to get viewers more involved. That's all it is. Leading lines are just one more compositional element to think about. They're another tool in your toolbox. That's it. Leading lines can do what an arrow would do, really, in a graphic. They point you to the emotional center of a photograph. They just point for you. They help show what you, the photographer, wanted your viewer to look at and even how you wanted them to feel sometimes. How about that? Doorways. Doorways are classic examples too. Classic examples of a natural framing device with leading lines. Here, Kathy and the kids are framed up in the doorway. Nice light. They're framed perfectly. It's an easy way to contain your loved ones. How about that? What else? Another doorway. How about an arched doorway? This is one of my friends, an ace carpenter named John O'Hare in Lincoln. He's standing in the doorway of our little farmhouse near Dunbar, Nebraska. He has rebuilt this house with his own two hands, basically. It's a doorway, all right, but it's a cathedral arch, a Gothic arch. That shape frames John in a unique way. Keep your eyes open for things like that. The ability to photograph something like this horizontally as well is very helpful. Okay, how about this one? A little bit more chaotic, lots of leading lines here. This is a guy at a dairy. He's building a new dairy barn in Seward, Nebraska. He's framed up this big doorway for a big milking shed. Look at the leading lines. Notice how I use the rule of thirds too. Look at the amount of depth of field we've got here. What do you notice about the light? Lots of stuff going on. Lots of depth of field because our light's very strong. I wanted all those trusses sharp. Small hole in the lens, lots of depth of field. Realize as you take more and more photographs, you're going to realize that every picture you shoot has to work for you. It's going to have these things. And if they don't, you can't center everything. If the light isn't right, the depth of field is too deep or too shallow, the picture isn't going to create the feeling you had when you took it. What I'm getting at here is I want you to analyze your photographs. What do you want? Lots of depth of field, not any, centered, off to the side, rule of thirds. You're getting the concepts, right? We're getting these concepts. All of them come into play every time you put your camera up to your eye, every time. You can frame things absolutely everywhere. Take this place, the Atacama Desert in Chile, said to be the world's driest place. This is the kind of framing I hope none of you ever have to do. It's looking through a tomb of someone who's been gone more than 150 years at a woman's feet. See, in the desert, it never rains, ever. So you see people, miners and miners' families that were buried a long time ago, well over a century ago, and the graves have been looted, and the coffins are just lying around on the ground. The bodies are lying around. The clothing's there, the hair's there. They're mummies. It's just like they were buried yesterday. It never rains. So in this case, we have a tomb that was opened on both ends already. Looters had been there 100 years ago. So I could literally just put my camera in one end and shoot out the other side, and I could see the cemetery in the background and those old turn-of-the-century shoes, those leather shoes. It isn't lit great, but it sure is interesting. And we have this framing device there. And above all, it's interesting because it's creepy, isn't it? It's not something we don't see every day, for sure. This is well before digital, by the way. I was using bounce flash, but I couldn't really see what that flash was doing. Now with digital, I could really craft that light. I could take my time on it, for sure. Nobody's going anywhere. I could turn that flash up or down and really craft the light. By the way, at that cemetery, that was the nicest thing I saw. Should have seen it down there. It was really, consider yourselves lucky that I don't show you more. That's my assistant, or my driver actually. As the light got lower, we tried a little bit different thing with flashlights. You never know. I work stuff and work stuff and work stuff. Now your framing device doesn't have to be completely obvious, by the way. It could be a tree with a kayaker going through it. Look at this. This tree provides all sorts of intricate framing, doesn't it? That kayaker is basically at the end of these leading lines. Rule of thirds are coming into play here. We're talking about soft light, lots of depth of field. Look at what else is going on here. Very slow shutter speed, and look at how those paddles are a little bit blurry as he's going through. So lots of things going on. This is a much more complicated picture, but it's using the same types of things. Framing devices, rule of thirds, leading lines, it's all coming into play. Right? I use framing devices all the time. I use windows to do that. This is at a wedding up in Minnesota where people are outside playing horseshoes or whatever it is they're playing. You have windows on a tent, and it helps to make the world more interesting because you can see through those windows and see what's happening outside, but you've also kind of compartmentalized things and fit things in. This is up at Leech Lake, Minnesota, looking through our kitchen window with that funky knotty pine trim inside our little cabin. The trim's been burned with some sort of a torch to make it look more antique. There's wife Kathy outside swinging on a rope swing at dusk. There are a few minutes at the end of each day when the ambient light outside matches up with the ambient light indoors. And that's right when this picture was taken. Right when it was taken. Really, this is what I love about photography, you guys. The world's your oyster. Think of anything that you can surround or envelop your subject with as a natural framing device. Frames and leading lines both help point the eyes to the subject photo of the photo, and the most important things your eyes can be drawn to in a photograph are the eyes of others. I love it when we use the eyes to draw people in. Eyes? Yeah, that's right. One of the most important compositional elements of all when you're shooting people or animals is the eyes. That's what we go for when we work for National Geographic. This is a huge thing, really, truly, even on a small little bird. Huge. I've had so many images rejected by National Geographic because the eyes aren't in there or the eyes aren't sharp. Your subject's eyes play a major role in engaging viewers. When there's a person or an animal in the frame, its eyes need to be in sharp focus for the photo to be effective. This is my preference, by the way. You may like blurry eyes, but boy, at National Geographic, we like them sharp. If you're doing close-ups, at least one eye may be in focus, should be in focus anyway. Eyes are kind of the holy grail in a way, aren't they? You can use them along with your subject gaze to direct viewers into the frame or to lead them off to one side of the frame. They serve as connection points. We look at where other people are looking naturally. So of course we do it in photos. Could be animals as well. Could be anything. So here we have Boy Scouts on a field trip, talking about eyes again. What have we got in this frame? Got a live grizzly bear at a Boy Scout camp out. It's been brought here. It's a trained bear for the movie industry, but look at the eyes on that kid that's standing across from it, right there. You can tell, man, he looks like he's just ready to run. In this photo, it's all being said with that one kid's eyes and his gaze. We're not super tight. We can see the whole scene, but you get a kick out of it or a laugh out of it because that kid is looking so suspiciously at the bear. And I don't blame him. This is back in the Atacama Desert. What's our composition like here? First, this is just direct sunlight outside, harsh sunlight, middle of the day, but we're not shooting that, no. Instead, we're inside taking advantage of the reflected light. All that bright sun is bouncing off the reddish clay yard that they have right outside their door, bouncing off that dirt and that lighting these people from below, picking up color as it bounces off the dirt. It's like ghost lighting in a way. But it's a really lovely light, and it separates them from the background, which is not well lit and has gone very dark. So we get a real good feeling of what their place is like, what their house is like. Best of all, you can see their eyes. Only the lady in the lower right is looking at me. The guy is looking at the interpreter, the daughter in the middle, she's kind of looking off the side, but they're having fun. Note that their eyes don't need to be looking at the camera. It's enough just to see their eyes clearly. It personalizes things and gives us this instant connection. That's what eyes do. Now this is a drill. It's a drill. It's a type of monkey, a species of primate, that's being kept as someone's pet on Bioko Island, Equatorial Guinea in Western Africa. As a National Geographic photographer, I'm constantly trying to educate our readership that animals have feelings too, that they are living, conscious, thinking beings. And when I'm doing portraits of animals against black or white backgrounds, I'm often trying to convey that sense of consciousness in a way, that these animals have value. This was right after the sun had just set on this very hazy island, and I had a friend hold up a piece of black velvet behind his head. He was a pet primate, and just shot towards his eyes. That's it, nothing to it. The eyes are the windows to the soul, absolutely. Just a piece of black velvet, and he's sitting there looking at me. That's all, that's all. Now, if you intentionally omit eyes, that can have an interesting effect too. I don't know that you would want to do that all the time, but in the first frame, that's me, Cowboy Joel, out on our farm. You can't even see my eyes, but there's something a little mysterious, maybe even a little sinister about that. So it's also much more mysterious and sometimes sinister for somebody to be looking with a straight face rather than have them smile. I think a smile gives things away sometimes. Seems to be much more intriguing and interesting to me if people aren't cheesing it up all the time with a big toothy grin in every portrait. Matter of fact, lots of portraits I do of people, when they aren't smiling, they're a lot more interesting and compelling. The first instinct is for somebody to smile when you put a camera up and say cheese. I tell people, I'll shoot that, but then I say, now just relax, just close your mouth, please. We'll just shoot one. Normal. I do that all the time. So what else? Having a subject look directly into a camera is certainly one way to engage eyes, but your subjects can be visually connecting with somebody or someone else in the frame, in the case of this rooftop party in New York, and that's effective too. She's not looking at the camera, but we're engaged. You see this happy couple, two happy couples in fact, other people in the background. They're looking at each other, these people in the foreground. They just got engaged. They don't have to be looking at the camera for this picture to work. In fact, I would argue that this is a better photograph because they are not looking at the camera. it looks like a real scene, and it is. Now, in the case of these kids, their gaze definitely is not at the camera. It adds tension to the scene. They're all looking at this girl in the top left. Believe me, there was a lot of tension this day. These are kids that are all waiting, listening to their supervisor to see how much they were going to get paid for the day. These kids were detasseling corn. It's a summer job in Nebraska for hybrid seed production, and they were all intent. They were all listening to her, trying to figure out what she's going to tell them as far as what they get paid, because they all worked very hard in the hot sun that day. It's just a shot on a bus on the way home. Now, sometimes you can have just sweet kind of direct contact with the camera. The eyes really connect us to this sweet little kid. This is at our local zoo when they just opened up a butterfly garden. The fact that this is very subtle light and that he's lying on this nice bed of leaves and his skin, the color of it matches some of the leaves. He has a butterfly on his nose. Those all add interesting layers. And as you know, layering is the holy grail if you're serious about photography. So yeah, it works. Nice soft palette of color, beautiful zebra wing butterfly right in the middle. Yeah, it's simple, but that's fine. Now, let me show you what I mean with this field demonstration out at the farm in Dunbar. Watch this. Okay, so we're in the field now. We're in a room. We have Emma DeVries and her grandparents. Well, how can we really set this aside and make this look great and special? Layering and framing are great ways of doing just that. What do I mean by that? Well, layering, lots of things near to far. Framing, literally I've put them in a doorway. In fact, 2 doorways, so that's gotta up the ante a little bit. Let's see how this looks. I think it looks really nice, actually. It looks beautiful. And the thing is, this is something you guys can do at home. It's a really effective way of kind of compartmentalizing things and cleaning up what's otherwise a very chaotic world, isn't it? But you know what? Once you guys have done this and tried this, it's a very straightforward thing to do and quite fun. I think you could do it even better. So let's try something actually next door through a window. Okay, so we tried a few at the doorway. I don't know, didn't really work. It didn't work as well as I wanted, but this seems to. This is a window right next to the doorway, and we've got a little beam of light coming in, hitting Emma, and grandparents are right there behind her looking in. So we've got framing perfectly. She's within this old style window. They're looking through the glass in the background. It's a nice multi-generational portrait. I think it works very well. The whole thing is experiment, look around. There's no right or wrong answer. It took me a while to find this, and I'm still not sure this is right, but I'm happy with it now. And I'll come back to this room again and again and again, since I own this room. And I will try different things. And you know what? It'll get better and better because I'll build on what I learned today. So you guys can do the same thing too. Find a good room, look through things and at things, and think about adding that third dimension, right? It's a 2-dimensional thing, photography. Get that third dimension in there. Layering and framing will do it for you. So that was kind of fun. I tell you, I don't think Emma's grandparents had ever been on television before, and that was really a hoot. I've photographed those guys so many times. They're like my own family, really. I've photographed them over and over and over again, and it was really, it's kind of an interesting afternoon. You know, one thing about it, though, is I'm still not sure. I feel like I should work that situation a little bit more. I don't feel like I really got what I could have gotten out of it. And I kind of like the doorway one a little bit more, that vertical. It just feels a little bit too forced around the window when they're looking in. It's like what is the room filling up with water or something? I don't know. But I wish I could have had a little bit more time to work that, and I may actually. It might be a little less forced, though, and a little bit more straightforward. Do something very elegant there. So this is really important, actually, in all this. The idea that we're trying to do anything we can to clean up the chaos of the world, aren't we? We're just trying to capture the feelings of a 3-dimensional world in what tends to be a very 2-dimensional medium, photography. That is our biggest challenge and something that we're always trying to do, but it is very hard and very elusive. You know, framing helps us isolate what it is we want to look at, but we have to be thinking about layering too. Layering. What's behind and in front of our subjects? Trying to get the feeling of 3 dimensions from a 2-dimensional picture. That is something I've struggled with for all 23 years I've worked for National Geographic. And it is the highest form, the highest art form, really. It's what we all strive to do, is make these very complicated layered pictures that really read. I love it, but it is really the ultimate challenge and very hard to do. And no matter how long you've been at it, you're never good enough at it. Nobody that I know that's any good feels very satisfied, like they've ever made a perfect picture. We have not ever made a perfect picture. And the moment you think you've made a perfect picture, I tell you, get out of photography, because there is no such thing. Guarantee you, there is no such thing as a perfect picture. Don't ever think that way. The moment you close your mind off, you're done. You're absolutely done. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a few pictures that I've layered up and talk about what makes them tick, okay? This is the only stoplight in the town of Salmon, Idaho, right? For 100 miles, this is the only stoplight. This is right on Main Street, and how did you do something like this? I thought about this because the writer of this story, it was a story on federal lands for National Geographic about 10 years ago, I guess. The writer for this story was really trying to think about how to talk about how isolated Salmon, Idaho was at that time. And we thought, well, there's only one stoplight, and that's it for 100 miles in any direction. How do we illustrate that? Well, easy. I shot it from the street. It really didn't have that feel that I wanted. So I got a bucket truck or a cherry picker truck, you know, like a power lineman would use to get elevated. I use those all the time. It's like a real cheap version of an airplane or a helicopter for me. I wanted to get up right into this stoplight, and I wanted to go up at dawn so the light was nice and even. I had to wait a long time to see people on the street because, see, I wanted to build layers, didn't I? I wanted layers. I wanted more traffic. I wanted more people, but it's early on a Sunday morning and people just are not up. Yeah, I should have probably done this in the afternoon. Probably would have been a little bit better because we would have had a little bit of sun on that nice red building. Instead, it's in shadow. But basically, you have the light, you have the traffic, you have the coffee shop sign, the street, the mountains in the background. There's only one person crossing the street, but that person adds another layer. If I were to do this today, I would probably shoot it with these high ISO cameras, and I would shoot a little bit later in the day when I wouldn't have to worry about fighting shadows so much, and these lights on these buildings would really come up well. So I would shoot this later after the sun had set, actually, when you have more people coming and going in traffic and going into the restaurants because it's dinner time rather than very, very early. Again, depth, dimension, you're seeing a 3D world captured in this one as best I could at the time on film, but just really trying to get layering, anything I could. It's a partially successful photograph. It's not a totally successful photograph. Let's take another one. This one's in a town called San Pedro de Atacama. It's in the driest place in the world, Atacama Desert, as far as I know. Some parts of this place, it doesn't rain for 100 years at a time. So let's look at the layering and take this for a little bit and how this picture's built. Number one thing, I look at this guy on the horse. He was always out there offering rides to the tourists. And I love the time of day because we just see these little lights coming on. I love the fact that the sky's pink, but this thing's got a lot going on. And to do a layered picture like this, it takes a lot of work. And I will find a corner and I will camp there and I will watch the scene build and come and go and come and go. I'm really working it because the dance of life is going along. I'll often have my camera on a tripod and I will just sit there and I will watch the scene build and go like the tide coming and going, coming and going. At times during the hour or so I was there until it was so dark that I really couldn't get any detail in here or color, I would just sit and watch. I would just watch. And at times the street would get totally empty. And at times you'd get a girl wearing a blue shirt and yellow shorts. And you'd get dogs coming in. And you'd get a girl walking. And you'd get guys unloading a truck. So this was the best, most cluttered thing that really, really kind of put this scene together for me. This really helps hold the frame together. The red here balances there. I'm thinking about all this stuff as I go. All the time I'm thinking about this stuff. I've got a blue door there that makes that horse head pop. I really think about this. This guy was moving around, but he'd mainly just sit there and stare at me and wonder what I was doing constantly. So I'm always looking at these things, constantly thinking, how can I layer it? I do this at fruit markets. I do this at fish markets. I do this all the time, constantly layering, 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 layering. The key is I find a good scene, I plant myself there, and I think about it, and I look through that viewfinder, and I really craft it. I really do. One more scene. This is one of my favorite ones. This is of a one-box pheasant hunt out in rural Nebraska. One of my favorite layering shots of all time because it came together, and it proves that you don't have to go to Chile to layer something up. This is just at the end of the day of a long day of pheasant hunting, right? There's some guys taking a break at the end of the day. That's it. Since I build pictures from the background forward, I knew if they stopped anywhere in that hayfield, it would be epic. Because why? These big, huge bales are lit so softly, so subtly, and they get smaller as you go to the background. See how they get smaller? So these leading lines take you all the way to the horizon. What else? I started just shooting these three guys with their pheasants on the ground. In the back right, here they are. I was shooting over here at first, and then I noticed that this guy's dog was really into these birds. He really wanted to chew on these pheasants, you know, like a dog waiting for you to hand him a treat. So he's holding one. This guy's holding one and talking to another buddy that's off camera here. And all of a sudden, this became a picture that wasn't just about layering, but it actually had a little moment. It had a little moment. Right here, the dog looking at the pheasant. The pheasant's got a little color. The dog helps hold that part of the frame together. This part's good. We've got the dog, the pheasant, the bale, this guy, his pheasants, and other bales going right back. So it becomes this epic scene, and it goes away really well into the distance. And the light is soft. So there's a lot of space there. It's subtle. There's nothing distracting. It's nice and clean. The guy in the background isn't sharp, by the way, is he? This is probably an f2.8 photograph. This was shot on film. That's the biggest hole I have in my lens. But I'm using a wide angle lens, so you get this nice sense of depth, this nice sense of place. I purposely did not use a long lens on this. Why? Because I wanted to see this big, gorgeous background. Now, make no mistake, okay? Composition. It is a big deal. I mean, it is a really big deal. It's what's going to separate the men from the boys in this situation. So, most situations will require you to actually think if you want your pictures to be any good. And that's why I'm here. I want you to think. I want you to think of me as your visual conscience. I am sitting right there on your shoulder at all times, okay? Got it? I'm right there on your shoulder all the time. When you get ready to shoot, I want you to think of me sitting there. And am I going to say, if you go to click the button, the shutter, am I going to say, is that interesting? Seriously, you're going to shoot that? The light's terrible. That's boring. Please think, if I'm sitting right there, what would Joel do? What would I do? Would I shoot it? Most of the time the answer is no to the question, should I take a picture now? You got to be discriminating. So, you're ready to go now, right? You got your camera, you know it, you understand the relationship between aperture and depth of field. You understand that sync metaphor, how water can be compared to light, and adjustments to aperture and shutter speed as a result of a faster or slower flow of that light to your camera's sensor, right? You know about light, both ambient and man-made. You understand that ambient light has different colors depending on time of day and source and reflections. And you can use your white balance setting, can't you? On your camera, you can correct colors to white, but I hope you know, I don't want you to always correct your colors back to white. I hope you know how to use that histogram. You know how to use your flash a little bit, maybe not at all, only a little, only when absolutely necessary, okay? Craft it, craft everything. Just know that everything doesn't have to be in focus. And actually, most of the time, you don't want everything in the world in focus. A little blur can fix a bad background, we know that. Or it can add a little sweet sense of motion and movement to a picture, can't it? And now that you've been through composition, what we take pictures of and how, these are big questions. How we use perspective, how we build pictures from the background forward, how we choose perspective and look for leading lines, the placement of the horizon, the layering to lead the eye into the photo and hang around for a while. And most of all, you've learned how essential it is for you to be your own fiercest critic. I'm on your shoulder and I'm bugging you. Please be discriminating and shoot well, okay? So your assignment, on to your assignment. You already know what I'm going to say, right? Layer and frame a subject in 3 photographs. This is what I want you to do. Layer and frame. You cannot use a door or a window. That's too easy, way too easy. Instead, you use anything else. And believe me, if you think about this, it'll come easy to you. Watch the eyes if you're photographing a person or animal, for example. Now what? Well, now I want to talk about the special challenges in the next lecture that different situations can throw your way. We're going to talk about taking pictures in both rural and urban landscapes. Some folks have trouble with both, but they sure shouldn't. And after the next lecture, you won't either. So let's get to work.